Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on cyber resilience. Glad to have you all here. But first of all, I'd like to say that due to some unforeseen circumstances, one of our original participants, Lim Tianjin, of the Director of Critical Information Infrastructure, CSA, could join us due to some unforeseen circumstances, but there's no need to worry because we have an able replacement with Stephen Sim, President ISACA Singapore chapter, kindly agreeing to join in the last moment. So, with that out of the way, let me give a context of what we are trying to do today. As you all know, the traditional well-defined network perimeter that have built decades to speak has become a thing of the past, and increasingly stakeholders log in to the network outside using a plethora of devices, many of them not issued by the organization. An organization's data center used to be the center of the world, so to speak, for CISOs. But today, data lives everywhere and employees connect from dispersed locations and devices. This development has, unfortunately, from the cybersecurity perspective, dovetailed with dramatic increase in the number and sophistication of cyber attacks aimed at stealing data. The nature of the network perimeter is expected to get even more diffused as fifth generation mobile telephone speeds to 5G, providing ultra reliable low latency connectivity, resulting in data residing more on the edge rather than in centralized data centers. In this situation, CISOs are increasingly turning known as zero trust network access or ZITNA platforms. These are replacing traditional corporate perimeters with individual access boundaries around most applications within the network. ZITNA allows organizations to hide applications from public view and implement a mechanism to verify every request for the information in real time and with a great degree of authenticity. This is of particular importance for the public sector, as increasingly more government data is stored online and citizen-centric services are offered online, particularly during this period of global pandemic. So how do organizations build a zero trust network access framework to ensure that critical infrastructure remains protected while at the same time allowing for ease of access for genuine users that is required in today's digital first world? So to discuss this, we have with us a distinguished panel of speakers who will share their expertise and suggest ways forward. Let me introduce them. I've already introduced Stephen, who is here as president of the ISACA Singapore chapter. Along with him, we have John Lim, manager, School of Information Technology, Nanyang Polytechnic, Singapore. Then we have Megat, who is the head of Department of Cybersecurity and Responsive Services Division, Cybersecurity Malaysia. He can give us the public sector perspective of this issue. Then we have Huang who's President Cybersecurity Chapter, Singapore Computer Society, and he is also quite well known for his views on zero trust. Then finally, we have Anthony Lim, who's Director, Center for Strategic and Cyberspace and International Studies, Singapore. So please do welcome virtually at least these fine gentlemen who will be discussing today's topic. So before we start today's discussion, I would like to remind all viewers that we will try for a question and answer session towards the end. If you have a specific question, please do send over via the message box, and please also indicate to whom your question is directed. We will try to get as many questions answered as possible. So with that, my first question would be, I'll ask this question to Anthony. What kind of security layers, both physical as well as software driven, are required to keep networks, including data centers, safe and secure? Anthony, would you like to answer on that?
Okay, I'll start with that, and I'll have my fellow distinguished expert brothers chip in. Okay, so basically your question is about layers, and for a long time there's been this discussion about defense in depth, or layers of security. And today, although the today because of the internet, perimeter defense is dead. We hear that a lot. So what happens is that security also has to have a variety of layers, whether it's physical or logical. Many organizations, for example, today will require two firewalls, okay, two layers of firewalls, and then at the same time you have other things like what they call edges. Today there's this thing about edge, the compute edge, the endpoint edge, and the data edge, and the cloud edge. So before we actually go into the idea of layers, what I always advise my clients is you need to have your whole network map, including the WAN, including the cloud. And once you get an idea of what your infrastructure looks like, and then you can put in where the layers are going to be, and every edge or every domain. So you have domains, you have edges, and it can get quite complicated, which is why you need a good visual of what you mean by the layers of security and where they want to be. So apart from firewalls, and what else do you have? You have the anti-malware, and you have the which now also extends to sandbox. And then you have other things like authentication, you have the intranet, you have the network segmentation, and then of course you have the endpoint. And out there, what do you do about the data and the users and the encryption of data, and the governance aspects and the policy and processes. So it becomes quite messy. You start with the conversation using the word layers, and you found that it's becoming quite metricized. And I think I've created a mess of the answer right now. So I'll leave it to my fellows to try and untangle the mess of layers that I've started the question with.
No, that's fine, Anthony. But one point that really stood out is two firewalls at the minimum. But let's hear what the others have to say. First, why don't we ask Megat, from the public sector perspective, what is your view of how to protect networks as they move more, as they become more diffused, as we just discussed?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Amit. And yes, I would like to also support Mr. Anthony Lim address about those complicated layers, and also the importance of the information data that we need to secure. And yes, with this new term of the zero trust model, I think is very important, in which that it has to treat every transaction, movement, or interaction of data as suspicious, because we have to ensure that all those movement data flows have to be properly controlled. And it is an important aspect that all the organization, and especially in the public sector, must be all aware, because we all know that the citizen data reside under control of the public sector. So the public sector must be well aware, need to understand the information, the control, the asset that they have. And when they want to migrate, for example, they want to follow toward to those zero trust model, they have to have a proper plan. The proper plan, change management, to ensure the process is being properly done. So that will be my point. Yeah.
Thanks, Megat. Those are very important points that you've mentioned. Stephen, you want to add something on this? Your viewpoints on this issue of how the network needs to be configured now?
Sure. I fully concur with Anthony on the importance of defense in depth and defense by diversity, as well as what Megat has mentioned about the zero trust, as well as being able to have the visibility of your assets and look at all the traffic that goes through. I would also take a step back and try to answer the question of how many layers are enough. So I think earlier on, Anthony alluded to the governance part of it. To elaborate, I think it's important that we also take a risk-based approach, because there is simply no 100% safety and security. To do 100% safety and security, we simply have to stop doing business or stop operating. So I mean, you mentioned about physical. So if take that as an example, if there's actually low risk of tsunamis happening in the locality, do you still want to build your data center 20 stories high? So anyway, coming back to the concept of having a zero trust mindset, I believe that it's about achieving that business objectives while adopting also that least privilege principle towards verifiable endpoints, not beyond the traffic itself. And it also entails that assumed breach approach, which is what Megat alluded to earlier. And therefore, this concept of active defense, which rides on also threat intelligence, threat hunting, having decoys, as well as security orchestration, automation, and response, which is SOL, to sweep out those sophisticated attacks in the network and therefore being able to contain them expeditiously, disrupting the attack before it even impacts business operations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Very nice insights. Shao, you want to try give your viewpoints?
Yeah, thanks. Let me try to take a step at this. I really like what Anthony said around the concept of the metrics. Because I mean not the movie metrics, but it's the mathematical metrics. Because when we talk about metrics, it's always X and Y, right? Two-dimensional. But if you look at the kind of environment that we're in today, you talk about cloud, for example, right? A lot of the business logic actually asynchronous. You have things like queue systems. I mean, it's not new. We have MQ in the traditional data centers, the traditional design, but now it's very prevalent in cloud. And that's where, it's no longer just two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional actually. You don't just look at the network parameter, which is the very challenging thing for CISOs and people who are in security right now, because the content can be everywhere. It can be at the edge, like Anthony mentioned, right? It could be in the lamppost, it could be in somewhere in Russia, in China. You don't know where the endpoint is really. So where do you draw the parameter? So I think you need to look at layering. The question is about security layering, right? You need to look at layering beyond OSI layer 3 and level 4. You need to look at the application layer. You need to look at the session layer to see actually where your crown jewels are. I like to use this analogy because if you do not know what you're protecting, you're not protecting anything. So I think layering is a very good question to start with, and I think it starts the conversation very well. Yeah, thanks. Back to you.
Yeah. Okay, John. You have not only deep knowledge in this area, but you also have the academic perspective on this. Can you share the issue in a broader perspective for our audience?
Thank you, Amit. Yeah, I entirely agree with all my colleagues here, and I think they probably covered almost everything. But perhaps if I can just again, borrow Shafei's words, give a step to this is one element is the number of layers. So if this gives our listeners kind of idea that how many layers is enough, maybe I would like to suggest another perspective, and that is not the number of layers, but rather looking at the combination of layers. What kind of layers are you applying? Whether or not these layers are complementary to each other, that they don't replicate the same kind of protection. Anthony brought up a very good point about the two firewalls, for instance. Just using that analogy for a while, is that there are reasons for putting two firewalls, but we are putting in the position where each of them complements each other, right? Even though they are based on the same technologies probably, and then of course looking at the network side. So that's the idea. If I can suggest some aspects to this, Stephen brought about some proactive layering, right? In the sense that there are some proactive activities that are there to maybe go ahead and find out what are the threats that are out there. So if I can suggest is that the layers could be a combination of different types of preventive and proactive kind of protection, in which and so by diversifying out there, right, then we can hopefully cover as many of the so-called holes as much as possible. But if there's one thing that I just want to talk about in terms of the physical and software driven, I presume the word physical layer would include also our policies, processes, how the humans interface with the machines that that we have. I think the recent trends have told us that our technology is there. Zero trust technologies are all quite pretty mature, and pretty much a lot of times we see is the weakness brought upon by human error or human weakness, or perhaps we fail to see certain holes through perhaps complacency and stuff like that. So we need to have, I would say, have more people coming in, have more ideas coming in to provide that diversity of defense. Yeah, so that's the idea there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Anthony. Nice perspective. But I have this question to all the which comes here. Everyone seems to agree that having a different layered system of security can help to sort of protect the data. But today we, apart from security, we have another buzzword that is equally relevant, and that is ease of access. I mean, especially for public sector data, where citizens, many of whom may not be really technologically savvy, should be able to access services and data with the ease that is, almost idiot-proof, so to speak. So, how do we protect the network, make it simple, and at the same time ensure the access to the network data remains smooth for legitimate users? How does one draw the fine line? I'd like to ask this question first to Megat, because we're talking about public sector data and he deals with that every day. So Megat, how do you secure the network with all the necessary layers and everything, and at the same time make access to data smooth and easy for everybody who's a legitimate user?
Okay, thank you, Amit, for the question. Of course, the easy access for user to access the information from their organization. Of course, it is important for them to ensure they know the best practices, the guideline, how to use all those access properly. So the one of important thing is on awareness. So they must know what would be the best process, the guide, because for the organization there can be a lot of people and there will be normal user which don't have all these IT illiterate, not have the security knowledge. So it is important for us to guide, to inform them what be the proper process, and of course with the tool, the security, the VPN, that to secure the network of the organization must be properly addressed by the infrastructure team, and of course for the user to what type of tool for them to use. And of course, due to the pandemic, the migration of on-prem type of activity, job work, and move to work from home or remote working, it have lots of potential threats. So therefore, as I highlight before, it is important for the whole organization to be properly educated, to be aware about the security, what is the potential threat, so on and so forth. So that will be on my perspective of question.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to put in their viewpoints on this particular aspect of how to draw the fine line between ease of access and security?
Maybe I can give an idea. I recently have heard about this idea. I cannot recall where I heard it from. It could be from a non-IT source, but I thought it gives me a lot of food for thought. And the idea is this: technology is matures, right, when it disappears. Technology matures when it disappears. What do I mean by disappears? That means the people who use it don't even know that it exists or is there in the first place. And that would be the ultimate endpoint you want to reach. If I were to use a very common example like SSL and TLS, it is so pervasive. It is, and there's interoperability between different browsers, and servers and technologies, as such that today we don't think twice about using it. To implement SSL or TLS, to use the proper word, all right, it's become such a norm. Like 90% of the traffic in the internet is already encrypted. So if I can suggest is that while it is a very elusive target, but the target we should be reaching for is when users utilize, carry out their work, retrieving data, accessing data, working with data. while doing so, right, the security service that is down there, the user doesn't even know it's there. Sounds a bit utopian, right? Yeah, but for me, like Shao is in the public sector. NYP is also a public sector as well. But I'm in a unique position where I'm both a user as well as a practitioner. I'm not in the role of Shao okay, within NYP. But I function as a user, but while still teaching in this area. So I'm like in a pretty unique situation now. So I do feel for the person who utilizes the government services. And unfortunately, I think the inherent risk for government services has just increased tremendously, right? Because there's a lot of potential for gain from the hacker side. So the disappearance of technology, that's the idea. Disappearing technology.
Yeah, I mean that's a great idea. You know, it's like someone once told me that when you plug your charger into a plug point, you don't even know which power station your electricity is coming from. That's the end state of mature technology. But anyway, we're still some way to yet to reach there. Shafi, your views on what Anthony said?
Yeah, more to what John said earlier on, because my name was mentioned quite a number of times. But to the question, right, actually, very frankly, my opinion is there is no best way to do this, or there's no one best way to do this. Why is that? Because I tried to draw from what the panelists said earlier on as well. I really like the point made about the two firewalls. I think it was from John as well, right? Yeah. So it is like you're trying to build security layers upon layers, and it's a tension, right? There's always a tension between how much security you want to put in versus how much access you want to give the users. So John made a very good point about the systems that in my environment. I shall not go more in that around that. Quite contentious thing to say, right? But really, if you talk about user-centric design, user-centricity, you place the user at the end of it all. Then you will ask yourself, actually, what are we protecting? Back to my first point earlier on. And going back to Stephen's point, it's actually a risk question. It's how much risk you want to bear. And I think there's a way to work around this. And it's not an easy way to do it, but you need to take a risk-based approach to see how much security you want to place at every juncture of the journey. So first of all, you need to plot out a user journey, right? And you need to work with the business to actually understand what is that journey about, and then to put the intervention points for security. So it sounds a lot like DevOps, right? Yeah, Agile and DevOps.
Yes, it gets complicated.
Yes, and that's exactly why security is having such a big challenge in, we always hear about DevSecOps. The same challenge applies, and it's not something that is very different. The other thing I would just want to quickly talk about is around, you mentioned about ease of access, right? But to me, it's also the way we have been designing systems and security solutions. I think there's a really lot of room to think about how we can decouple security from actually the business, and actually decoupling it from the application design. I really like what John said. It's like when you drive a car, you really don't think about the brakes, right? Until the time when you are going to hit somebody, then you think about the brakes. You hope that it works. You assume that it will work. It's the same thing with cybersecurity. You don't think about it. You assume that it will work, right? But how do you get there? I mean, you're absolutely right. We are on the path to getting there. But I think to get there, really, first of all, you need to understand how that whole envelope, how that whole design came about, right? And where security sits in that. So it's a little bit about architecture, it's a little bit about the design. But at the center of it all is really understanding what the user needs, what the user wants. Not what the IT team needs or wants, or not what the CIO wants. It's really what does the user want. And that really has come about in leaps and bounds in the past few years. Everybody is working on cloud, the digital natives, everybody is developing on the cloud. And that has really changed how we look at digital, how we look at security. And this is a very good question again, because it really can talk about all these things for forever. But just want to end my remarks on that note. Thanks. Back to you.
Okay. Anyone else wants to add anything on this point?
Yes, I mean, let me jump in on a point about this. government data availability for the users? Well, first of all, typically there are two groups. One group of data made available to public and mass is usually what they call sanitized or anonymized, so that any interested parties or agencies or private organizations that use the data could access and use the data safely without endangering any individual or any organization or confidential data. With respect to personal data or confidential data, there's no two ways about it. You'll still need the usual protection and governance and authentication and encryption. There's no way around it, especially in many countries with the personal data protection law coming in. Now, governments have very, very large databases. So, and very, very large networks. So again, the usual practices and processes and technologies and governance needs to be in place. There's no two ways about it to protect all that data. So there's one group that can be made safely public, and then the other group still needs the traditional thought processes of protection.
Yeah. Stephen, some quick response to that, because we all still have some other areas that I'd like to cover, but a quick response to your this point.
Concur with the rest of the panelists, if I may add on, the balance between concentration risk as well versus integration as a pain needs to be handled in terms of the layering approach, whether it's defense in depth layering or defense by diversity layering across the entire governance framework, such as this. So, take multi-factor authentication as an example. It can actually be painless, right? Be less painful, such as integration with passwordless authentication, which really eliminates the need to set study password strength, expiry, and reuse policies. So I think what Shao mentioned about the need to ensure seamless user access is important. Otherwise, users will simply try to circumvent, and we know there is no 100% security. So the line to be drawn is really largely dependent on what ISACA describes, and I alluded to earlier, the risk optimization process. Because there's no single bullet, therefore the sweet spot has to be determined by weighing the benefits versus the optimal risks and resources. And because the risk owners hold the purse strings, and adding on to what Shao mentioned earlier, and therefore that well-informed decision has to be a risk conversation that takes place between business, risk, legal, and the technological folks supporting the discussion. The buy-in is very important. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. Okay. Now I'd like to ask the panelists, something. When you're building trusted networks, should organizations take reference from worldwide standards and practices? What kind of protocols need to be in place? I mean, since I just mentioned 5G and how it is bringing data to the edge, one good example is a Network Equipment Security Assurance Scheme, or NESAS, which has been jointly defined by 3GPP and GSMA, and which provides an industry-wide security assurance framework to facilitate improvements in security levels across the mobile industry. This, and there are other protocols, similar protocols. So, Stephen, why don't you respond to that? Do you think it is best for organizations in this region to take reference from these international protocols like NESAS to build their trusted networks zero trust networks which are resilient to cyber threats?
Yep. I think definitely taking reference from internationally recognized standards and protocols are important because they have been scrubbed extensively. The RFIs, the request for comments, and their FDIS, the various processes to scrutinize the draft, capitalizing on subject matter experts all across the world, really helps to make the standard as robust as it can. But no standard is foolproof and can withstand the extensive time or future proof. So there's always improvements, continual improvement. The key challenge is to agilely meet emerging threats. So you can tell from my previous answers that I'm very much a governance person. So again, back to that risk optimization approach. I think it's important to have that robust governance framework. And again, I stress that because there is simply no 100% security. So adopt that right risk-based approach. As a organization, you will have to take some risk, right? Otherwise, you close shop. So that getting that across is important. The alignment from the enterprise risk framework downwards down to the actual implementations at the ground is important. The following the standard blindly is not adequate. You need to contextualize it to the nuances of your environment, the risk that you can tolerate, and the constraints and limitations to identify where is that kind of that sweet spot. And if you can't implement certain aspects of the standard, you will want to then put in compensating controls while still allowing that operations to function. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. John, can you give me a broader, give us a broader academic perspective on these international standards and how they help security practitioners to build better networks?
Okay, I think there's two aspects here. One is you mentioned about the standard for the 5G networks,
Yeah.
And certification of the various devices used in this technology. There, sorry to say that, but personally, when for me, if I look at data being transmitted across public networks, where your data is going to travel into various networks controlled by different people, different parties in different countries with varying levels of security practices and stuff, right? I'm pretty skeptical whether or not end-to-end security can be achieved. But of course, it is still a path in the right direction. Yeah. So for me, I would still like to leverage on things like application layer security. Something that Anthony is very well versed in. Yeah. So I would pretty much want to augment it with my own with security that I can control. All right. And I mean, it's good that 5G networks have all these security things in place. The incident that happened some time ago where hackers compromised certain 4G networks, it's still very fresh in my brains. Yeah, but I mean, for the longest time we've been talking about end-to-end encryption. It is not there for nothing. It is still a very good principle to have to achieve if you can. Along the way, where we can improve the security in terms of providing additional safeguards, that's very good. But from an organization's perspective, I think we still need to do our due diligence, whether or not we outsource or utilize external service providers. Yeah. Of course, on the other angle, we talk about this standards in terms of like best practices, protocols. The value of all this is really that I think the first thing we want to do, we do right, is to look for NIST look for ISO look for various things like COVID to come up to look at what's the best practices, and from there we will build upon that. So the value of that, this way of doing things is it has been proven, and it's something that we always teach in school. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Megat, you want to give me the public sector perspective on this, using best internationally developed best practices in order to secure networks?
Okay. Yes, I like the point highlighted by John previously, related on the partnership, the importance of partnership with the industry subject matter expert on how to look into the cybersecurity to address all those issues. Because of course, there is lots of guidelines, standards which is available, but the most important part is on the organization itself, because they themselves know. Because for them, the priority is to provide their services to the people. So when they want to look into all this proper cybersecurity development, deployment, so they need to work closely together with the industry, with the partner, with the cyber subject matter expert, how they're going to move or implement the proper way, the process, the timeline, so on and so forth. So the importance of public sector, if they want to move to this new technology, cloud security, cloud deployments, and so forth, need to be properly supported by the partners and the industry. So that's my point.
If I may just quickly add on.
Anyone else want? Yeah, go ahead.
Add on a quick point to what John has mentioned about certification and end-to-end, as well as what Megat mentioned about the public-private partnership. Tianjin is not here, and I'm standing in for him, so maybe I help him sell some puyo. So the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore came out with this cybersecurity labeling scheme, which is to accredit IoT equipment. So that forms part of the equation for end-to-end security. So with accreditation like CLS and common criteria and so forth, that helps to in some ways provide guidance to companies and consumers in what are the products that are security by design, that adopt a security by design perspective, and gives a certain level of assurance, especially now we are talking about supply chain attacks with Ssl, with SolarWinds and so forth. This become ever more important. Not a silver bullet, but at least that gives a certain level of baseline assurance.
Yeah, Shafi, you want to add on this?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just to respond quickly to Stephen's point around the cybersecurity accreditation part. I'll be very frank as well. I think there's always a trade-off, right? The question is whether are you, the consumer, willing to pay more for more security? So when I went shopping for a fridge a couple of years ago, I actually paid more, for that fridge because it has 4 ticks. But I think the subs, it saves me money in the longer term. Well, thankful that actually the decision worked out for me. Actually, I saved some money from the electricity bills. But then the question is, if you are going to pay a little bit more for security devices, right? What is that trade-off? So that decision comes around, and I think it goes back to the point around standards and best practices. Go back to the question. So standards actually have taken a very bad rap the last few months, in fact, right? Because a lot of the large organizations have been hit, and it's not because they were lax in security. It's not because they did not adopt the best standards and best practices and so on, right? But rather it is the whole mindset around standards. Because standards means compliance, right? Because that very word means that you need to comply with certain things. And compliance actually presents a very, very false sense of assurance, because you think that, I actually comply with all these checkboxes, therefore I'm secure, and that's really cannot be further than the truth. And that is why when you talk about what are the things that we want to learn from in terms of best practices, I think I also have a very radical view around this. I like to maybe spend a couple of seconds to just talk about this example, right? During World War II, there was this plane, number of warplanes that came back from the sorties, and researchers were actually trying to find out how to actually better defend these planes. So they actually analyzed where the bullets hit on the wings and on the fuselage. But actually, truth of the matter is that they really should be looking at those planes that did not make it back. Because what they were looking at were all the planes that made it back. So they were actually, this actually has a large analogy with cybersecurity, because when you talk about best practices, we are actually looking at cases that we understand, the cases that we know about, and the threats that we know of. But the fact of the matter is that when you talk about cybersecurity in this day and age, what are the things that we are most scared of? It's those things that we do not know about, right? And I think that's a very good point. The kind of things that we have seen in the industry is like mind-boggling. It's like, oh my God, how could this have happened under the radar, right? And that's really the thing that's scaring me. And then talk about standards, practices. I mean, best practices would be good if they can actually help me unravel some of the, actually help me get some way ahead to look at the crystal ball to see what the hackers are thinking about. So around the whole concept of trust, actually, when we trust something, we trust that actually a certain amount of thought, a certain amount of risk-taking has been taken, and it's very transparent and explainable to the user, to the consumer. And I think that is something that really need to be maybe articulated more in terms of security standards and best practices. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Anthony, you want to add something on this?
Yes, okay, I want a couple of points. So further on, Shafi brought a good point about, and you see how this whole conversation is taking a life of its own right now about unknown threats, fear of the unknown, which is why new things are coming like offensive security, external threat intelligence, where instead of trying to defend yourself and make your layer thicker, or like Shafi are talking about the I'm sure you all know the story about the planes, or which planes made it back. It's like we know a case of in cybersecurity where we're preaching to the converted or we're beating a dead horse. So now you have things like external threat intelligence solutions coming, where you go one step further and find out what data has already been leaked and what enemies are technologies and techniques they are using to come and attack us. So we're actually stepping beyond the realm, and which is quite encouraging, although again it makes it more complicated. But coming back to standards and best practices, let me say something for that as we close. It's always important, especially for the less savvy organizations like SMBs and other organizations, because it forms a baseline, at least a baseline internationally experienced reference standard. Where do we go from here? What do we do? For example, like ISO 27001, you've got 200 overlines. You're not going to follow all of them, but at least you get a general idea what you're supposed to do. You pick your fights. So standards are and you're not going to follow everything. You're not going to follow NISA and NIST and all that at the same time. It depends on what domains you're in, where your interest is. And even a PDPA has published guidelines on how to protect your data in electronic medium and all that. So they form a very good baseline reference standard to have an idea of where your security posture is. And then on that, after that, based on the standards, then you need to fine tune and focus on certain areas, like what Shafi was alluding to. Big international organizations have followed international standards and they still yet get hit. So on top of standards, where is the specific areas they need to pay attention to? So this is my take on your question about standards.
Yeah, thanks. That gives a very good perspective. But yeah, I want to just run with a point which you just made when I asked my next question. It is about external threat intelligence and knowing what information is out there in the wild, so to speak. So in that perspective, I want to ask you folks, the many security experts feel that the actual resilience of a network is better measured by the systems and processes in place that can help to quickly contain a breach if and when it occurs. Can you provide a perspective on this? Anthony, why don't you start first? No, how does your organization respond to a breach rather than whether your organization can stop a breach?
Yes, again, that's very important today, because how we respond. Okay, we need to do both. We need to do all three. We need to have the protection, we need to have the response, and we need to have the prevention. Okay, so we need to have all three. And it's been shown in recent cases in like past few years where there was a very, very big landmark data leak in Singapore, that the incident response management, which was broken, is very important. So how do we ensure that incident response is done for process? And I think that's one very important. How do you respond to a threat in the concept of cyber resilience? When I teach this in school, in the concept of cyber resilience, you assume that you're already invaded. You assume that the malware or some threat actor is already in your organizations. And like you said, how do you contain that? How do we ensure business continuity? How do we ensure disaster recovery if need to, while at the same time minimizing and eliminating and isolating the threat? So this more work for CISOs and more work for the IT folks, but this needs to be done. And unfortunately, again, I'm not giving any good answers here, but it has to be done simultaneously, like I said. So you have the external threat, you have the internal threat, you have the prevention, you have the response, and you have the I've lost it already. Protection, defense, and how do you ensure? And again, earlier on, Megat talked about awareness. The staff awareness, and it adds to the vigilance and the resilience of the organization. So there's so many facets and domains that we need to deal with at the same time, which has been the consistent thread of every question in the forum this morning so far.
Yeah. Okay. Megat, I'd like to get your perspective on this. I mean, how do you sort of respond to a situation where there already may be a breach? How do you minimize the problem that the breach can cause to the network?
As highlighted by Anthony about the preparation, the planning, response, the mitigation, of course, that is the common thing that need to be well prepared by the organization. The point is clear. The organization need to be well prepared, not just by depending on the tools to look into all those threats, the logs, to do the analysis and everything, but they also need to have the capability, the internal team that have knowledge on how to respond to the incident, what need to be done. And the organization itself, the top management also need to be well aware about the issue, the situation. And on the media side, what will be the media, the response, how we're going to explain to the public, to the customer when the breach happened. I also want to touch that it is also important for the organization to test out all those capability, the tools that they have used, the resources, and also the process. And one of the area is they might try to do this cyber simulation exercise or cyber drill to test out all those process. In Malaysia, we have this cyber drill activity called XMIA, in which that we call all those critical sector organization to be to participate in this cyber drill exercise so that they can test their process and at the same time to test their technical capabilities, whether they're well aware about all these threats, the situation, the problem, and what they need to do, to whom they need to report to, so and so forth. So that can be one of the area in which that for us to be prepared, for example, if there is an incident.
Yeah, thanks. John, you want to come in with your perspective on this?
Okay. I just want to point out one thing is that it's easier to measure the organization in terms of the number of breaches it contains, because the event happened, right? So you can measure 1 year how many gets blocked. But it is much more difficult to measure how effective you are in your protection mechanisms, because how do you know that your protection mechanism was effective? Because the successful scenario is that nothing happened. Nothing happened. But we don't know whether is it the best you can do is of course look at the environment and say, oh yeah, these guys got attacked, so I was not attacked. So let's assume that I was also a target of the attack. So then we can plus one, So that's one element there, lah. But on the other perspective is that I can see the attractiveness of looking at the ability to contain the breach. For one thing, I think we are all quite what's the word to use here? Quite tired from this chasing where being in part of a race where we try to block here, block there, try to block whatever attacks or method of attack that actually comes in. I can liken it to the analogy where in the past where we have antivirus, so we use signatures to target certain viruses, and then suddenly there's this thing idea of what heuristic detection mechanism. So there's the promise that this heuristic mechanism can potentially even identify future viruses. So you are having a drug that can potentially cover the whole scene. So I think the ability to contain a breach is maybe seen in that kind of light. Whatever way you attack, okay, so long as I can detect that you are in, I will respond to it immediately. But I think focusing too much on this capability is also not a very well balanced thing. But which is what I think I get from the other comments as well. So I may sound like a very very boring person, but I think there should be balance. We still need to. It doesn't being able to contain the breach doesn't mean that we can totally neglect, or rather, not say totally neglect, but rather neglect to a certain extent our effort in investing in protection mechanisms. There, but I'd just like to emphasize on one part is that in line with governance, it is that the human element is still is probably the most one of the more important hurdles that we need to overcome right now. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And one of the one person from the audience has made equally very good point. The challenge is fostering a culture of vigilance and professional skepticism. I think that is a very important point. I'm not too sure who made that point from the audience, but really, you really hit the nail on the head as far as I personally think. Shao, how about you? Challenge is fostering a culture of vigilance and professional skepticism.
I'll try to talk a little bit more about the professional skepticism part, because the panelists have touched on the earlier part about, right? I maybe take a leaf from what Megat said around the whole thing about cyber drills in Malaysia. They are done in Singapore as well, and I'm sure in many other organizations. But you know the thing about cyber drills is that people always try to practice against scenarios that they have already been preparing for the last 6 months, right? They spend time talk about the scenarios, they come up with all the draw plans, and then when they go to the exercise, it's just regurgitating. Do you remember what your role is? Do you remember what your role is? So again, when you come to when something really happens, everybody is like chaos, right? And I think all these exercises are, yes, they do go some way in terms of familiarizing people with their roles, but going back to the question about resilience, is about being able to alert, response, and recover to actually deal with the incident, and this cannot be done by the IT team alone. So to my point is about the professional skepticism part needs to be taken really at a larger level. You need to get into certain conversations, communicate this with your chief executive, with your board of directors. They need to understand the whole problem, and what better way to do this than by using examples from the real world, because we have so many incidents these days, right? It's no longer something that appears suddenly on the papers. It's like almost in the papers every single week. So there are stories we can use. We can use that part to actually visualize and depict the threats, and maybe ask the question around what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong, right? I think the question that we fail to ask ourselves enough of is around what are we not doing enough of. Everybody is talking about, oh, I have this, I have that. It's a good KPI, right? A good scorecard to present to management. But I think to John's point, it's also about being able to ask ourselves the tough questions or the difficult questions, and that's only the way we can improve in terms of resilience. The other point I want to make, again, back to John's point, a very interesting point around signatures to heuristics in terms of detecting threats. I think the whole thinking around cybersecurity, I've been in this business for the last 20-something years. When we started this whole thing, right, everybody was really targeting deterministic outcomes. Again, a little bit of mathematical terminology here. Deterministic outcomes means that you put in a certain set of variables in a formula, you get a certain outcome all the time, right? But today, when you talk about cybersecurity, you put the ingredients together, you put it in the microwave oven, it comes out something different every time. Every time. How are you going to defend against something like this, So you can no longer take the approach that you contain I'll go even further to say that you need to assume that your systems are already breached, right? If you assume your systems are already breached, you will have an entirely different mindset around security altogether, You're not going to be taking time to actually measure this, measure that. You're going to be worried, how am I being affected? How do I find this guy? How do I find this threat, right? And I think that is the part where the last point I want to make is around this thing called bias, BIAS, right? Cybersecurity professionals, professional skepticism, all these things, right, carry bias. Why do I say bias? Bias because we think that the hackers think the same way we do, right? Truth cannot be further, guys, because the hackers could be even smarter than us. They could be even one of us. I don't know, right? We talk about using technologies, practices, standards to defend ourselves against all these threats. Guess what? The hackers know this too. The hackers are using the tools that we are using to defend ourselves, like CrowdStrike and all these things, right, to attack us the same way back. And we have no way of defending ourselves in that fashion. I think we need to really be creative and to also be very, very entrepreneurial like the hackers are, and that is why it has to be a partnership between customers or stakeholders like, my organization and the industry. You cannot defend the war alone on your, that's why I like this kind of panel, because we are collaborating, right? We are exchanging views, exchanging ideas. And we can only become better. Yeah, thanks. Back to Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Shao, for a very good response. Anthony, Stephen,
Yes.
I'd like to hear both of you. Anthony, you want to go first?
No, actually, I just wanted to add on to Xiaofei's very good point about yes, the hackers themselves have the technologies also. Okay, they will spend money to buy the commercial solutions and deconstruct them and learn how they probably know more technical support about the our solutions than we do. They also have AI. They also have automation, and they also have software development to come up with scripts and tools to automate attacks against us. So we're always playing catch up. And one more thing that I like to say that for many years, the hacker community have been very collaborative. They share information a lot better than the good guys. But in the past 20 years, we have improved. A lot of governments are sharing information right now and collaborating. A lot of banks and a lot of other agencies and commercial organizations are starting to be more willing, and even vendors are be more willing to share information about the common issues rather than keeping a distance. Oh, you're my competitor. Why should I share with you? So it's getting there, and that's very important. And then like Xiaofei said, why we like this kind of panels where we get to cross-pollinate and collaborate and learn from each other.
Yeah, you never know. The hackers might also be having their darknet webinars on these subjects.
Yeah. Or one or two of them might be tuning in,
Yeah. Okay, Stephen, what your comments on this?
Xiaofei's points definitely resonate with me. I have just two additional points to expound on. First and foremost, standards. Compliance standards doesn't mean that there will not be breaches. So I think we have been talking about this for a fair bit. Zero trust means assume breach. That is where the threat intelligence come into play, because it is not about not being breached. It is about being breached yet being able to contain the attacks expeditiously enough to prevent the crown jewels from being laterally penetrated into and therefore resulting in business impact. And that's precisely where public-private partnership, as what many of you have alluded to, where public sector entities and associations like SCS, CS, CIS, ISACA comes in. And in Singapore, we have this Singapore CyberSecurity Inter-Association, helmed by AISP and supported by Cybersecurity Agency, which helps to foster this synergy and collaboration, as well as with the ISACs as well. And with schools like NYP work together through GovInsider and association events to definitely exchange mind share and have a better finger on the pulse on the ground and tap on the collective wisdom and intelligence. The second point I want to make is I think John shared about protection. How do we measure protection? I think it is definitely across people, process, technology. If you look at the NIST framework, definitely protecting and protect, detect, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? All these phases are important, but with the assumed breach approach, there's a shift right towards detection, response, and recovery. I think earlier on, Megat alluded to incident response drills, tabletop exercises. We definitely have a lot of that. More importantly, it's also disaster recovery and business continuity planning. When all things fail, can your business continuity plan work, and how long and how far can you sustain? Of course, there's other risk optimization measures like cyber insurance, but then it has got a bad name recently. We know that one of the insurers recently stopped insuring against ransomware, and they themselves got breached by the hackers because the hackers now have one less stream of revenue. So I think to quickly answer John's question, I think there are metrics, security metrics. I think we discussed a bit about that earlier on. So how many of the attacks are blocked by your IPS? How many attacks are blocked by the firewall? Actually proves the ROI for the firewall and the IPS, or even for the antivirus, the number of malware that's detected and blocked. That shows that it is effective against those. Of course, the layered approach is still required. Yeah, those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we are just almost running out of time. There's something I want to do, a quick fire round. I want to ask each of you to very briefly say what are the top 3 things CISOs need to do to build a resilient network. Let's do it just quick, very quick so that we don't run out of time. Megat, you go first.
Well, on my point, my prospect will be the first one, build a security first mindset. So that should be one is important. Utilize the technology because now with the threat, you can utilize, for example, AI, machine learning for you to look into all those potential threats in your networks. Of course, implement zero trust, assume that there is a breach and how we're going to protect. And of course, the important part is the partnership with the industry and how you're going to address the cybersecurity problems.
Okay, Shafi, quick, the top 3 points.
3 points. I'll just have one. I'll let the other panelists have a chance to. I think the most important thing is actually to keep current and keep ourselves attuned to what the current threats are, because they are changing very fast, and we are learning all the time, and it will be a great disservice to our employers, our organizations, if we think that things are going to be unchanged for the next 3 to 5 years, and take that kind of approach and mindset. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great point. Anthony, you want to share your quick fire viewpoint?
I may or may not have 3 points or CISOs, and for better or for worse, one of the things that we need to do for CISOs as CISOs is that they have to become a bit more like Shao and Stephen and Megat, where they need to get involved in industry forums, and they need to keep up, because many CISOs tend to be internalistic people, and they need to associate, they need to network better, and also there hasn't been a lot of networks organizations for CISOs, okay, but up until now, but only now many countries are starting to slowly form organizations where CISOs can come together and share and network. So that's one very important area where CISOs need to externally network with the industries, with the vendors, with forums like this, and with other CISOs. And the second thing is internally, they also need to be aware. For example, like I said earlier on, what is your network map? When I audit organizations, the first thing I ask them is show me your network map, and they start looking and laughing because it hasn't been updated for 2 years. So they need to understand this. And today, the network map extends to the WAN edge, extends to the cloud edge. They need to have a good hold of this. They don't need the details, but at least they get an idea of where the new parameters is, where the new edge is. And the third thing is that they need to continue to ensure staff awareness, staff training, staff motivation to be part and parcel of all the security requirements. Remember, cybersecurity is people, process, and technology. So we always think about the technology. What about the people? What about process? So again, CISO's work is not easy, and getting more and more on the plate today.
Yeah, people, process, and technology. That's a great point. Stephen, your quick fire.
The other panelists, I just have 3 key points. First, again, adopting that risk optimization approach that is in the doctrine of ISACA. I think finding that sweet spot and yet allowing the business to operate optimally, that's important. Secondly, that assume breach approach. I mean, we talk about security by design, shift left, but that shift right in the NIST framework, for assume breach as to rapidly contain attacks, having focus on tabletop recovery is important. Not least as what the rest of the panelists, Shao and Anthony has alluded to, that agility to react to threats, keep ourselves constantly abreast of threats. We are constantly relearning, upskilling, and also sometimes unlearning what we have learned, because things change so fast. And that is where the ecosystem thinking, where the public-private partnership is important, because the faster we get intelligence, the faster we can react and therefore agilely contain attacks and protect our organizations.
Thanks.
Our ecosystem. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And John, finally, your 3 points or more?
I'm not in that role, but if I can give my 3 points, the first is generate buy-in. But the buy-in, I think we are all in that area. I think the level of buy-in from corporate leaders has never been higher. And then the other 2 would be interface between the human and machines. All right, our processes and the setup that we actually have. And then the last one, which is not covered here, actually one thing we should also look at is the value, the return on investment from our security, all the efforts and stuff. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be judged by our ROI. We cannot escape from that, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've actually run a bit over time, but it was a great discussion, and I hope everyone who joined in had a very fruitful session and learning from here. And I want to personally thank each one of you for taking the time to share such very interesting viewpoints on a subject which is, I think, one of the top of the mind for every single organization that's out there, especially during this pandemic where digitalization has gone up by 6 to 7 years in 1 year. So thank you again, and it's been a pleasure and honor for me to moderate this panel, and I hope to catch each one of you again very soon on future discussions and panels. And bye. Thank you and bye-bye.